really, really looking forward to speaking to our next guest, Mr. Harry Symeou, host of the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast, one of the best broadcasters out there, joins us now. Declan Rice, what is going on, Harry? Number one target. You're fumbling the bag. That's what the kids say on the street. You're fumbling the bag.
Everybody just needs to stay calm. How are we doing, guys?
Not bad.
Good to speak to you. But look, I think at this stage, everybody just needs to remain calm. I think that obviously Arsenal are huge admirers of Declan Rice. It's clear that he's a priority transfer target. It's clear that, to me anyway, that West Ham were going to do everything within their power this summer to try and create a bidding war. I'm not saying that they're sort of making up the Manchester City interest. I think there is interest there from Manchester City. Of course there is. But I think West Ham have played this really, really smart in terms of maybe just delaying the process a little bit. I know people keep looking at Arsenal and saying, well, you know, they should have got this done already. They know what the asking price is. If you believe some reports, it feels like maybe Arsenal were convinced that they could do the deal for less than the £100 million mark. Hence why those first couple of offers came in. And I'm not defending Arsenal Football Club here, because I think if they miss out on Declan Rice, there'll be a lot of questions to be answered. But what I am saying is, I think that even if they coughed up the deal worth 100 million right from the beginning, I think there's a good chance that West Ham would have stalled in order to try and wait and see what happens if somebody like Manchester City came into the race as well. If you read Jacob Steinberg's report tonight, he says that Declan Rice is still very keen on the Arsenal move. And I know you guys were having a little debate around well, I say a little debate, it was quite a big debate around where he should go, what the best option is, etc., etc. I just think, or I'm hoping, I guess, that Arsenal have put in enough groundwork on this one with Declan Rice on a sort of personal level to make sure that there isn't anything that can potentially derail this. I think Arsenal will cough up the money that West Ham want eventually, which we think is around about 100 million. And so although today's news and reports were a little bit worrying and a little bit concerning, I've not given up hope that Declan Rice is going to be an Arsenal player by the end of this window.
Oh, Harry, you are a glass half full kind of guy, aren't you? This feels like a very generous appraisal to Arsenal. Let's put our cards on the table here. Surely on some level, by some definition of what's happened here, Arsenal have made a pig's ear of this, haven't they? You could have had Declan Rice in the bag whilst Ilkay Gundogan was still a Manchester City player. Suddenly, Ilkay Gundogan moves on. There's talk of Bernardo Silva moving on. And Manchester City suddenly realise that there is a Declan Rice-shaped hole in their squad. You could have had him signed up and you haven't. You haven't learned from the mistake that you made with regard to McElhenney, Rudiger, allowing Chelsea to swoop. City are now going to swoop on Rice and you're left standing again.
Rory, it's not that cut and dry, mate. It's not that cut and dry. Like, from the very beginning, we've heard that Manchester City have asked to be kept informed of the Declan Rice situation. Manchester City have held an interest for a little while. We know that Chelsea liked Declan Rice in the past. We know that Manchester United are supposedly in the mix, albeit maybe not seriously at this stage, but there's reports tonight that they've offered cash plus a couple of players. This was always going to be one of those things where, however early you try to wrap it up, West Ham were going to go and inform those other clubs that had shown an interest that the Arsenal thing was progressing, in the hope that they could create and spark a bidding war. That was always going to be the case. And if anybody thought that Arsenal were going to have a clear run to Declan Rice, I think that was naive, to be honest with you. It is not that clear and dry. I think Arsenal as a football club do not operate in the way that a lot of these other clubs do not have the wealth that a lot of these other clubs do. And I think from Arsenal's perspective, there is a responsibility to be careful in the transfer market and essentially to make sure that you're not getting a raw deal. And I think Arsenal will have a limit in their minds of what they are willing to pay for Declan Rice. And if the deal goes crazy, like the Mudryk deal did, then Arsenal will walk away. You know, Arsenal clearly didn't feel that McElhenney Mudryk, for example, was worth what Chelsea thought he was worth. Chelsea were willing to go that extra mile, and Arsenal had the discipline to go, hold on a minute, this is getting a bit crazy now. We're going to have to walk away. Now, I don't think that's happened yet with the Declan Rice deal, because I think the money we're talking about is still in the bracket of reasonable. But Arsenal, whoever pays £100 million for Declan Rice is overpaying. There's no doubt about that. So I think Arsenal is still just about within that realm of where they believe it's acceptable to pay that type of money. And I think this is the way it was always going to pan out. It's not being generous to Arsenal. It's not Arsenal making a pig's ear of it, because Arsenal can only spend what Arsenal can spend. You know, Manchester City can outspend anyone if they want. You know, we know that Chelsea have done that in the past, £600 million later, and they're trying to find a way to press the eject button on the seats of a lot of their players. You know, so bad spending can cause problems. And when you don't have the resources to be able to correct it in the way that Chelsea are doing now, you know, through a route that some people say is questionable, if you don't have Manchester City's funds, you don't have that incredible wealth, then you have to be smart in the market. And Arsenal are just playing cautiously because that is what their setup and structure requires them to do.
I always felt that we knew that other teams were coming for Declan Rice. Again, one of the best midfielders in this country. Some say one of the best midfielders in Europe. I have to agree with Rory here, which is quite rare. I think the reason I think Arsenal have messed up in this one is it's the 75 million over 4 years and the 15 million add-ons over 5. I think that's the problem. If your budget for Declan Rice is 80 to 100 million, you just go and give it to them because he's your number one target. And not only that, he then bridges that gap to you potentially fighting for top 4 next season or winning the league. And I think if he's your number one target, you go in heavy on him and you get him. Forget about Caicedo, forget about Timber, forget about any other players you linked with Lavia. You go and get Declan Rice. And I feel like you've maybe missed the opportunity here because of the 75 million over 4 years. That's the only bit I agree with Rory on. The rest, obviously not.
I've got to disagree because you say that, you know, it's the structure and it's the way that they've proposed the deal. Obviously, that's because that's the way that Arsenal can do the deal. That's not Arsenal being cheeky. That's not Arsenal trying it on. That is Arsenal trying to work within their means. When I was on here earlier on in the week with you guys, I said to you that I felt like at some point, sooner rather than later, the club were going to have to return to a sort of self-sustaining way, and they were going to have to sort of scale it back a little bit in terms of their outlay every summer. You can't just, without Champions League football, which they haven't had for a number of years, keep going 250 million every summer. There's going to come a point where they have to change things. They know now that they need to take the next step, and they think that the way that they can do that now and fast track it, given the spend they've outlaid over the last couple of seasons, is to do these deals over long-term arrangements. That's why Arsenal have proposed that deal that way.
But Harry, don't you think, Harry, it's changed with Arsenal now? I remember, we're not talking about Arsenal over the last couple of years that were challenging for top 4, even challenging to get into top 4. Expectations have changed. Arsenal fans are expecting a team to challenge for titles. Surely that changes in the boardroom. The mentality of, okay, we can't spend that. Surely you've got to take a risk here, and the risk is Declan.
Yeah, but how much has changed in terms of the club's finances over the last 8 months?
Well, maybe.
Well, you've got to the Champions League.
You've gone to the Champions League, and maybe you don't look at 4 players then. Maybe, Harry, you don't look at 4. Maybe you say you park Timber. Maybe you park the talk for Lavia, and you put all the eggs into the Declan Rice basket.
But Declan Rice alone does not bridge the gap between Arsenal and Manchester City, which is why Arsenal need to be smart about this. It's all good saying they should have gone and outlaid the money all at once. Arsenal need to strengthen in a number of positions this summer, and they are trying to do that with the means that they have available to them. And the way they are looking to do it is by doing these structured deals, which allows them to spread the cost over a long period of time. Because people look at last season and they go, look, Arsenal got back in the Champions League. Great, they're going to have the Champions League revenue coming. It hasn't come in yet. Nothing's changed financially for Arsenal dramatically over the last 6 to 8 months as a football club. And you go back 2-3 years, they've been spending, not been in the Champions League.
So basically, you can't afford Declan Rice.
Arsenal can afford Declan Rice in a structured deal, and that's why Arsenal are trying to do it that way. So what Arsenal have done, in my opinion, here is they've gone, right, let's approach the player here. Let's try and do the groundwork in a way that puts us in a really strong position, whereby we hope that Declan Rice will say to West Ham, look, I'm flattered by the interest elsewhere. I understand that you want the best deal for your club, etc., but this is the place I want to go. Arsenal are banking on Declan Rice pushing this through. And I think they've put a lot of work in the background to try and get to this point. Listen, I'm not defending it. In a way, it is frustrating the way Arsenal are going about it, but I'm just trying to apply some logic as to why this is the case, because I don't think that this is Arsenal just sort of sitting back in their chairs and going, you know what, we'll take the mick a little bit here. We'll try and we'll try and pay them over 4 or 5 years. And also as well, the reports about the structures of these deals. I mean, to me, there's so much conflicting information out there. Do we really know how much of it's going to be paid up front? Do we know what the add-ons are made up of? I think there's a lot of conflicting information out there, and I think it's really easy to go, Arsenal are just being cheapskates here and don't want to pay the money. If Arsenal end up with Declan Rice, which I still believe they will, I think a lot of people are going to have to sit back and sort of have a slice of humble pie. I really do.
How essential is it, Harry? So let's say that it doesn't go your way. Let's say that for some reason Declan Rice decides to go and join the treble winners. What does this mean for your season next year? Who do you sign in that spot? Can you compete again?
If Arsenal don't manage to get a target that, as I say, I think they've put a lot of work into, then it's back to the drawing board, and that would be a big concern. So I can understand why the reaction to this is so substantial. I get all of that. In terms of alternatives, the truth is that as Arsenal fans, we've been so focused on the idea of Rice, Caicedo, or both, that there probably hasn't been that much sort of attention paid to the wider footballing world from a fan's perspective. You'd hope the club would have alternatives lined up. You'd hope that they'd have done their groundwork. But I guess the bigger concern here is the fact that we could lose Xhaka and Partey as well. If you told me that those two were staying and we missed out on Declan Rice, then I don't think it becomes as big a problem as it could potentially be. So I think the problem that we've got here is that we're expecting a couple of departures of two players that were so key in our midfield last season. And so we feel like we need the big one to come in and try and bridge that gap and sort of put a patch over that position. And if we fail to do that, then I think we're in a spot of trouble.
You mentioned Partey there just before we break. Phone lines are buzzing, by the way, with this. A lot of Arsenal fans want to get in touch, and understandably so. Why is Thomas Partey being sold? Me and Roy were discussing this, and look, the back end of the season, last 6 or 7 games, yes, he wasn't at his best, but before that, I mean, he was your Rolls Royce.
One of the best players in the Premier League.
He's only 30. Arguably one of the best defensive midfielders in the world, and we're hearing a fee of around £20 million to Juventus. What's going on?
It's difficult to put your finger on what exactly has gone wrong there. I think you're right. His performances for 3/4 of last season were outstanding, and then there was a massive drop-off, and there's no doubt about it. Like, I've sort of waxed lyrical about Thomas Partey throughout last season, but when we got towards the end of the campaign, his form dropped off. He didn't look fit. There were so many questions that needed to be asked of him and the performances that he was producing. He got taken out of the team. In came Jorginho, and that sort of restabilised things for Arsenal a little bit. That was kind of their second wind when it looked like they'd thrown the title away. Then they sort of picked up a couple of results, and people thought maybe Jorginho was at the heart of that. And it's difficult to say exactly why. I mean, it's probably the last summer that you're going to get any value out of Thomas Partey, which could play a part. Some reports are suggesting that this is being driven by the player, that he wants to move away. Big money offers from Saudi Arabia, from what we understand. Also, Juventus have thrown their hats into the ring. But from what I understand about that report, it seems as though that's only if Adrien Rabiot does not stay on at the club. Arsenal will get significantly less money out of Juventus than they could potentially from the Saudis, but I think this is quite possibly a decision that's being driven by the player, which is, it's hard to put your finger on exactly why. When you don't know what's going on in the dressing room and you don't know what's going on behind the scenes, it's difficult to say this is the reason why Thomas Partey potentially wants to leave Arsenal Football Club.
Harry Symeou, as always, my man, great to have you on. Thank you very much. Host of the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast, doing so much more as well. As I said at the start, one of the best broadcasters in the business for me right now.